This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Herd Out Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, and welcome into the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith. Your football season is here, so I've just basically been running around like a chicken with my head cut off for about a week now. But today I'm very excited to be joined by a very special guest, Miran Fader, who has written the book, Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. Miran, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this has been something I've wanted to do for a while. I was happy that we were able to get it scheduled. I'm going to embarrass you right off the top because I have told you this privately that I think you're a great writer. And so I was looking forward to this book. I'm a fan. I read all of your stuff, so I have to embarrass you and say that off the top.
They can't see me, but I'm turning bright red. Thank you so much.
and that's the reason why I said it, because I knew that it would embarrass you.
And that I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So typically, you guys, longtime listeners of the show, know that we usually have 3 segments on the show. We kind of start off with Coach Speak, where we go over something that a coach, player, or a talking head said, and then we give you kind of the straight up breakdown of what you meant. This time, I'm going to completely change all of that, and I'm going to go a different way. And I really just want to talk to Miran about the book. There are a million things that I want to ask. I will not have time to get to all of them because I need to be, cognizant of her time. But the very first question that I have for you, very basic, starting off on the bottom rung here, is what made you want to write this book?
Yeah, I did a profile of Giannis and his youngest brother, Alex, for Bleacher Report, where I previously worked. And, at the time, he hadn't won his first MVP. And I just felt like the discussion of him was so much like, wow, look at this freak of nature. Look at his athleticism. Look at his body. But when I spent the day with him and his family for that story, the things that fascinated me were so different from this athleticism narrative. I was like, he's so mentally tough. He's so nurturing. He's so caring. He's so kind and thoughtful. Like, I want to explore these other nurturing sides of him. And I was just like, how do we know so little about this guy, right? Like, he's one of our biggest superstars. And at that time, becoming a superstar. And I was just like, I don't know anything about him. So I wanted to try to fill those gaps in.
Yeah, and that's what it has been interesting, even in just kind of thinking about this, and even obviously just watching him and his team just win the NBA championship, is that he's someone that is clearly very recognizable, and that obviously because of his name has great name recognition, right? You can't forget it. But we actually don't know all that much about him. And so I feel like people have kind of made this story a narrative around him. So I guess that leads perfectly into something else I kind of wanted to talk to you about is where do you think that kind of revisionist history gets it wrong with Giannis and his story?
Well, I think first of all, there's just so little information about his childhood that people don't necessarily know anything about the background other than sold trinkets on the streets. So, I think the fact that he was undocumented and grew up essentially stateless and had to deal with a lot of racism and a lot of red tape as well to even get his papers, that is a major reason why he was unable to ascend to the highest teams in his own country, let alone ascending to the NBA. So I just think that part of his story, it is revisionist history because people don't acknowledge that it's not like people in Greece identified him as being very good and they were not grooming him for superstardom. And they only gave him his papers at the last minute because they saw and they realized that he had a chance to go to the NBA. So I think, with Giannis, it's such an inspiring story. It's such a feel-good narrative that there's this tendency by people in media or just in general to say, look at this fairy tale. Look at this rags to riches story. Look at this American dream. But when you use those terms, it just glosses over the harsh realities and the deeper themes that, have prevented him from ascending most of his life.
Yeah, and when you talk to people about those harsh realities and how all of that kind of came together, what were people's feelings about that? Was there still lingering anger? What was kind of the feelings around all of that about the perception of how that all went?
Well, I think there's two things. Like, number one, there's a lot of Greek people that love Giannis that were coached him or friends with him or whatever, but that have so many blind spots, when it comes to like race, and they just keep repeating, like, we don't have a problem with that in Greece. Like, there's nothing wrong here. And they'll say, well, Giannis doesn't talk about it, so it must not be true. And, the reason he doesn't, he's not as vocal as I guess other players has nothing to do with the reality of the situation. That's his choice. But so I think just, like I think, but there are definitely people that do get it, that do see the hypocrisy in it, right? Like the only reason why you treated Giannis with decency and respect in terms of giving him and his family the documentation they needed is because you could see that he had value as a basketball player. So I think that, you can hold both of these two things at once, that there were like really kind people that helped him out and were awesome, and then people that also did not. And both are true. Both are part of his story.
Right. And I guess, switching gears a little bit, I guess I'm trying to think of different ways to ask this, because I'm assuming there are a lot is going to be the answer to this, to choose some. But what's an anecdote or two that you came across kind of in researching and writing this book that made you go, okay, wow, that's actually true, that happened? Like, what are a couple of those?
Yeah. The one, the one thing that came to mind for me is one of the evictions, because I chart a lot of the evictions of the family and how difficult it was at times to sustain rent. And I found one of the landlords that told me that they gave them like up to 6, 7, 8 months grace for this family. And it was really cool learning about that, because the person didn't want credit or like didn't want like a gold star. Like, yeah, I helped Giannis when he was 15 years old. But I do think that was important to note, that there were a lot of faceless, nameless people that had a lot to do with helping them stay afloat, and people whose names we'll never know. And I really appreciated learning about that. Another anecdote was Giannis so flash forward to when he's in America, and he's still trying to like grapple his rookie year with his past and everything that he's gone through. And given that, what we just talked about him being undocumented, he grew up with this like anxiety that at some point his parents could get deported. Like if the police stopped them or something, they'd be like, wow, you don't have your papers, and then deport them. Right. And so I think that once he got to Milwaukee, he was still distrustful of people for those very reasons. And so this Bucks staffer came over to Giannis's apartment rookie year to help with the cable installation, because Giannis didn't feel comfortable having this strange man from the cable company come in and install it. And so long story short, it takes all day. The staffer gets really hungry. He goes into Giannis's pantry and he eats a couple of Giannis's Oreos. And he doesn't think anything of it, right? He's like, whatever, I'm hungry. I'm here right. 9 to 4. And then the next day at practice, Giannis is just like, hey, like, did you eat my Oreos? And the guy is like, like, what do you say to that? Right. Like, no. And then Giannis was just like, well, I noticed 3 were missing. And so it just really, like, who does that, right? But then right. it really clicked with the staffer, because like, of course Giannis does that. Of course he counts his Oreos. He is so used to growing up without and having to go hungry at times that he always had to be cognizant of how much food was left. And, it was just such a poignant anecdote that really showed like all that he's been through, and how it's not just like you make the NBA and make millions of dollars and your life is fine. Like you're still adjusting to this newness.
Right. And I think I also wonder too, if in that moment that Buck staffer realized that like, we'll never have to worry about Giannis and work ethic. Now, maybe they knew that before that moment in particular, but that would have cemented right. that, right? So like, right. you just
That's never, so true.
Yeah, it's someone that is never going to be satisfied. But that also, hearing that story, the thing that I immediately also thought about Giannis is the amount, and I've talked about this on the show before, about the amount that his body has changed in the time that but from the time he got to the NBA until now. And like, you have to have a certain drive to do that, to go from what he looked like before to what he looks like now. There has to be a drive there. And now kind of hearing these stories, you kind of get an even deeper appreciation for why he did that and where that comes from.
Exactly. And that's why when people say things like, oh, like he doesn't have any skill, he just gets by on his God-given gifts. Did you see his body rookie year? He didn't get by on his God-given gifts. He like
Right.
worked like God-given. Okay, yes, God-given that God gave you 2 more inches once you landed in the NBA, but like that muscle, that like chiseled body is like him just not leaving the weight room. And the irony of all of this is that, you know, through my reporting, I learned that he learned how to weightlift as a rookie in Milwaukee.
Okay.
The strength coach, Robert Hackett, had to teach him how to bench press, how to hold the bar. And it would just be like trembling, you know, like these days, if you don't know how to weightlift by 9th grade, people are like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
So, yeah. So, I mean, it's miraculous. Like we forget he's only 26 years old. Like he's still somewhat new to this.
Yeah, which which is also a scary proposition, and people have been saying
Right.
that for the NBA, and we've seen that kind of growth that even since the first MVP, he's continued to get better.
Yeah.
But I'm going to stay in that realm though, because and I can't picture, and this is weird to do on the fly, but as you were watching the playoff run and then seeing the finals, knowing that the book was complete and this book was going to come out, I'm trying to picture if I remember seeing you like live tweet Bucks games. I don't think you were. So I'm trying to think, this will be the first time I've gotten to know, like, what were you thinking? What was that like for you watching all of that unfold?
Incredibly stressed. When he goes down with the injury, I'm losing my mind. I'm like pacing throughout my apartment, like, what is going on? Like, I need him to be okay, you know? And then they like miraculously get to the finals. I'm shocked, right? Because half the like a good portion of the book is about the struggles of the Bucks, like the Milwaukee Bucks from like a historical standpoint. Like I grounded the book in this history of like basketball can't work in Milwaukee. That's what people said from the beginning. Oh, they'll never land another superstar like Kareem. So I include all this history to show how awesome it is that they finally get a guy like Giannis. But then throughout the playoffs, they like do something that I never thought was humanly possible. And I'm like, shit, the book was due in March, you know, I can't add on. And so I cried when they won. I know that's not cool to say. Like
It's fine, it's fine.
I know we're supposed to be
Sports
like,
are emotional though.
You know, like I just was just like so happy for him because he worked so hard for this. And I was just, you know, because I spent so much time learning about just really tough times that he went through. And it's just so cool to see anyone who you know, observe like that succeed. And it was just so cool. But yeah, I was so stressed. Whenever they would do something stupid, like keep launching threes when they're all bricking, I would be angry. And I'm like, not supposed to be like that, you know, no cheering in the press box, but I'd be angry. I'm just like, what are you go to the basket? So.
Yeah, okay, good. I am glad that was kind of the reaction. And now, though, I understand why you were not live tweeting Bucks games then, because you were going through it.
I don't know how all of you do this. Like, I can't pay attention and say something funny and like look at what others are doing. Like, I just can't.
It's actually one of the weirdest things, and it's funny because for Hail Varsity's like actual social account that have like, and we kind of cultivate this to have a personality and all of this, and basically Aaron Sorensen works on our team, who was on last week, or 2 weeks ago, is the one that does all of that. Like I could never do that. I honestly like spoiler alert here, I don't even have the password to the Twitter account at work because I just couldn't do it. So even doing like a little bit of live tweeting that I do during Nebraska games, it's hard to do. It's one of those things that fans don't realize is actually a lot harder to do than just like tweet out quippy observations, especially you get like kind of invested in what's happening.
Like I'm having a breakdown over here. Like I cannot tweet something about this moment. I think one time I just said OMG. That was all I could muster.
That's all you need.
I said OMG, and then people thought it was funny. So I was like, okay, cool, I'm done with this.
You're like, I've had my fill of live tweeting.
I did it. Yeah.
yeah, you made it. And so one of the things, and you mentioned this about the Bucks and kind of like their franchise history is fascinating as well. But then also because of that, and because of Giannis's rise through the ranks and him becoming a multi-time MVP and all of that now, like were you able to talk to Bucks fans during this process? And what was it like for them? Because they've gone through a lot during this time seeing his rise, kind of dreading whether he was going to leave or not, like all of that. So what was that like talking to Bucks fans?
Yeah, I love talking to Bucks fans. I talked with a lot of Bucks fans, and I was actually able to go to a game against the Thunder in late February 2020, like right before the world shut down, and just like ask everyone, like, is he staying? Is he going? And so it was good to like do that in person, you know, before that option kind of like changed after that. I think Bucks fans like really vacillated between like utter denial, like, of course he's not leaving, to like complete panic, like, oh my God, I think he might really leave, to like just so much confidence, like he's loyal to us, it won't happen. But like everyone was freaking out inside, and it was really nice to talk with them before he made the decision and after, to learn about the nerves before and the just utter jubilation after, because it's like something you like, all of them remember exactly where they were when Giannis resigned. It's like a cultural moment, you know, and it's something that like, this has been a decades old wound in the city of Milwaukee when Kareem left. The generational player just never stays. It's always like getting the short end of the stick, being underestimated because you're a Rust Belt city or what have you, just being looked down upon. And you know, they feel so seen and respected and dignified by Giannis, affirming that they are awesome and that their city is awesome. And he did that even before he won the championship. Right. And so I just think to then win it again, like I never thought this would ever happen, and neither did any Bucks fan. They told me this is what the mindset is, Mir, and it's called hopeful worry. We're going to have hope, but we're going to be stressing because the Bucks might Bucks. And then they finally didn't.
Yeah, which is good for them. And it's so weird because even as you explain that, and like the people that have been around this podcast, you guys know this, that I am a huge Lakers fan. Lakers are my like number one team, period. I would choose the Lakers winning a championship over a weird number of things in my life. So like, but because of that, I'm always on the opposite end of this, right? So like I had talked myself into Giannis coming to the Lakers and playing with AD on somehow. I wish people could see the look you just gave me. So, like,
I'm from LA. I'm related.
Okay, that works. See, that works. So, so you get it. So like even with that being said, there is still a part of me that likes to see these guys stick around with that team that drafted them, and then be able to, and then in this case, win one for that city, and especially cities like Milwaukee, where it's not somewhere where like people are lining up to go voluntarily. And so because of that, though, when someone does well and they put the city on the map, I think people can also then learn about that city and learn that, okay, this place is actually pretty nice. Like you can actually do stuff here. And I think that the impact that Giannis has on that city and the tie that he has with them is actually a really special thing, despite wanting to steal him for the Lakers.
I feel that, especially when Kostas was there, right? Yeah. But you know, keep in mind that he also saved the franchise of Milwaukee from leaving the city. You know, when the Sonics left Seattle, it was like, oh, Milwaukee could be next. You know, right. Adam Silver, right before Giannis got drafted, he said, you need a modern day arena. The Bradley Center, which is where the Bucks were playing, was not a modern day arena. So the Bucks were, since like the 80s, the 90s, they were always threatening to leave. So Giannis really has not just won them a championship, but he has saved the franchise from leaving the city of Milwaukee. And I don't think that's talked about enough.
No, definitely. And it's actually weird because I'm also originally from Chicago. And so I've been to Milwaukee a bunch, and I've been there since they kind of with the arena and all that. It's actually pretty interesting about how that all kind of came to be. And like you said, with the potential of them having to leave and all of that. And now it just becomes like a rotation of like any other struggling franchise as the team that could end up going to Seattle. And so you always kind of feel bad because it's always the same couple of teams. At this point now, it won't be the Bucks, but yeah, it's always kind of weird how that kind of goes in cycles. Right.
Yeah, I never thought about that. That's so true.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So Miran, thank you again so much for being on the pod. This is a very informative conversation. I want you guys to make sure that you know that the book, Giannis, The Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP, It comes out on August 10th. You can pre-order it anywhere that you pre-order books. I actually have it pre-ordered on Amazon. It will be delivered. So go ahead and do that. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere you listen to them. Rate us and leave us a 5-star review. If you only leave us 4, I'm inclined to think you're a hater, and no one wants that. Make sure you are checking out the other podcasts on the Hail Varsity Network, the Mind Your Own podcast, Varsity Club, Nebraska Preps Post Game Show, and the Hail Varsity Radio Show. Also, make sure you're checking out the Hail Varsity YouTube page. You can find me on Twitter at GregSmithHB, at Mirren Fader. It's just her name. She was smart to actually just lock down her name. You can email the show at straightupbreakdown@hailvarsity.com. I will catch you guys next week.
A Huda Media Production.